Hey everyone, today we're going to be replacing a rear wheel bearing hub assembly on a 2010 Mazda 3. This is the 2-liter model, so let's not waste time, let's just dive into it. First we're going to place our jack on the standard rear jack point, get it set without raising it off the ground. Then we're going to break free all of our lug nuts. It's a 21 millimeter socket for these. Alright, now that all those puppies are broken free, we're going to jack up the car until the wheel's off the ground, and maybe a little more so we can get a jack stand under there. And we're going to lower it onto the jack stand and just keep the jack under there for a little extra. Verify that it's stable. Seems good. And then actually remove the wheel lug nuts with a socket wrench a little bit quicker. Alright, now that all the lug nuts are removed, we can remove the wheel. Now we have the braking assembly exposed. Now to get to the hub, we're going to have to remove the brake caliper bracket and the rotor itself. Okay, so there are 2 bolts that hold the caliper assembly on. They're both right in the back here, one on the bottom, one on the top. The bottom one is pretty easily accessible with a ratchet, but the top one, the brake lines are in the way, so you need to use a wrench, unless you can work some setup that will get in there. I'm just going to use this wrench because it fits nicely. It's a 14, both bolts are 14s. So I'm just going to get it on there nice and give it a couple little taps to get it started. And just spend the time working it the rest of the way out. Alright, so I removed this top bolt, slowly working it out. Now I'm going to go for the bottom bolt. I'm just going to use a breaker bar with a 14 millimeter socket on it. Tuck it back in there. And then switch to a socket wrench once it's broken free. Alright, once your 2 bolts are removed, you should be able to pop the caliper assembly off of the rotor. Be mindful of the brake lines. Try not to damage them or cut them against anything. There is one point where the brake line is mounted here. It's best to just pop that out to give you a little more freedom. Alright, set this right there for now. Once your caliper assembly is removed, you're free to remove your rotor. These might be stuck on. If they are, what you would do is you would take a hammer and a block of wood. You'd put the block of wood along the edge and give it some good taps with the hammer, switching sides until it breaks free. But definitely use the block of wood, otherwise if you hammer it directly onto here, you'll do some damage which won't feel very good when you're braking. Okay, now the wheel hub is fully exposed here. There are a couple things you want to do before removing it. Number one, we sprayed some penetrating oil on the bolts because these tend to be pretty nasty to pull out. The other thing that's very important is there is a wheel speed sensor that goes into this hole here, and it has a connector hooked to it, and the wires aren't too long. So for removing your old one, you want to make sure that you unplug that connector. Simple pinch and pull, and also double check that your part is the right part, the new part, so that you don't go all the way in there and find that you don't even have the right part. Alright, the connector is unplugged and we're now ready to remove the old hub. The bolts, there are 4 bolts in the back. They're all 14 millimeter and accessible from the back here. Now there are various ways to get to these. I'm going to do the 2 on the right first, because they're both accessible with kind of a setup like this, like a small extension with a socket. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get it set on there good and see if I can break it free. Well, it's started. Once they're broken free, you can just loosen them with a ratchet. Shouldn't be too hard. Alright, we got these 2 bolts removed. Now we have to work on the other 2, which are a little bit more difficult. The best way I found to access them would be from under the car with a couple extensions coming out the back. So that's what I have going. You could also add a universal to come down a little bit. I think this will do fine for me. So I'm just going to stick it on the bolt. You can see it through here and just wind them out. Alright, now that the hub assembly is fully unbolted, you can see it's just sitting in there. Yeah, they're not just going to fall out. These things like to get very stuck, even if they haven't been in there for a super long time. But lucky for you, we have a trick for you. We've done tons of looking for good tricks to do this, tried them all, had little luck, then did some experimenting of our own, and found that if you take a small hammer like this, the good edge, this is just a little ball, and then set it on one of these corners and then hit pretty hard here, you can get the whole thing to spin, which is usually the goal anyway, until it's free and it just basically falls out. So let's give it a try. This one looks pretty bad. See how long it takes. fun already. I've spent hours trying to do that in the past. So now we're just gonna keep it spinning until it falls out. All right, I'm gonna go the other way a little bit. Just try to free it up a little more. Sweat a little bit. And there you have it, it's out. This is that connector I was talking about. As you can see, the wire is maxed out right now. It doesn't reach past there. So if you were to pound that out or even spin it probably enough, you would probably pull these wires out of this connector and have a bad day. All right, now that we have the old and the new here on the desk, we need to move this wheel speed sensor to the new one because they don't come with it. It's just an E6 inverted star bit, and it comes off pretty easily. And there it is. We'll just transfer it straight there. And then snug it down. Definitely not too tight on this. I don't think it can handle too much. All right, we have the new one ready to go in, but first we're gonna clean out this hole in the surface a little bit with the wire brush. It's because there's a lot of rust residue in there, and we want the new one to go in as easily as possible. We'll give it a little test fit, make sure it seems good, and there it is, it's good. Before putting everything back together, we're just applying a little bit of anti-seize to all of the bolts because these are bolts that tend to corrode a lot and get stuck in the future, so we're gonna try to prevent that in case we have to get back in here again. All right, now we're ready to put the wheel bearing hub in. Something to think about if you're just thinking about doing this and you haven't already dove into it is maybe buying a new one of these if you live in an area where rust is common, because these are always pretty beat. This car doesn't even have a lot of miles and it's already falling apart. I kind of wish I'd gotten one, but I didn't. So that's gonna go right there. The open space where the caliper is gonna sit. The wheel bearing is gonna be installed with the sensor on the left side here. It's towards the front of the car. And we're gonna hold that in there and try and get a bolt started from the back. I think I'm gonna need to put it on extension just because my fingers aren't quite long enough to get it back there. There we go, it's lined up. Being a little bit difficult, so I'm going to drive it in with a ratchet. I'm not going to tighten it all the way, just because the others might not line up then. Alright, now that we have one in just to hold it in place, I'm going to go ahead and get all of the rest started and for the most part snug down. Down here I just went around and made sure I tightened all of them. They're pretty easy to get to from down here, so I just went ahead and did it. Now while I'm down here, before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the wheel speed sensor. It's definitely important to do. If you don't do it, you will most certainly get some lights on your dash. So I'm just going to slide it over the connector or over the sensor, and there was a click, so I know it's on there good. And then we are done back here. Alright, now that the hub assembly is fully bolted down and the connector is connected again, I'm going to go ahead and clean this rotor before putting it back on because I let it get a little bit dirty laying on the ground. If you can keep yours clean, good for you. I failed. Probably should have done that elsewhere. Anyway, once you're ready to go, you can slap this back on and then cut down your caliper assembly. Make sure you don't have any twists in your lines, and then hopefully just slide it on over your rotor. Not too bad. Now I'm going to get started the two bolts that hold the caliper assembly onto the knuckle. Alright, now that the caliper bracket bolts are finger tight, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down the rest of the way. The bottom one I'm going to use a socket wrench on, and the top one I'm going to use the same wrench setup that we had before. Alright, now that our caliper bracket is mounted snugly, we are nearly finished. The last thing you have to do down here is an important thing. You have to get this brake line mounted back in its proper place just by pulling it in. If that's not in there, it'll move around until it gets cut by something, and that's not something you want. And then I'll give one last check. Make sure I didn't forget anything. Make sure everything looks tight. And then we're ready to put the wheel back on. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna back up a little bit, slow down. I'm gonna apply a little bit of anti-seize to these, just to help those lug nuts come off a little bit easier the next time, because they're a little bit nasty this time. Doesn't take much, just enough to get it to distribute around the threads. All right, now that all the lug nuts are snug, I'm gonna jack up the car a little bit to get it off the jack stand, and then pull it out and drop the car. And now I have a nice, solid wheel that won't turn, that should be easy to torque down the lug nuts on. Always use the standard star pattern when torquing down your lug nuts. And there you have it. That is how you change the rear wheel bearing hub on a 2010 Mazda 3. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks for watching.